Wasteland, the best in anything, anywhere. This is my co-host, Kara. How are you doing today, Kara?
Hi, and who are you?
What?
Who are you?
I'm Chauncey Howard. I'm not doing well today. So
Oh
yesterday,
no.
I have this problem. I have a problem. I don't say no to my wife.
Uh, yeah.
And she asked me to take her to the casino yesterday, and it was a Tuesday. And I have
Interesting.
another problem, and that is that, like, well, for one, I'm fat, so I'm trying to lose weight, and I'm only drinking White Claws. So I drink like 5 White Claws, but still, it sends my brain into this sort of like stress. I become emotionally fragile after drinking. Maybe it's only after drinking White Claws. That'd be funny. But
I mean, yeah, I think that's normal, but go
plus,
on.
last night was the first night that I became the White Claw guy. That when I came up to the bar, they said, "Oh, you
Like,
want a White
like
Claw?" And I'm all like, "Yeah, I do. That is what I want." I wouldn't say I want it, but that's what I got. So I'm emotionally fragile today, Kara. Take it easy on me.
I see. I see. So you're saying you're hungover.
I don't think hungover is really the word because I don't feel physically hungover or anything. It's just the next day I feel like sort of stressed and sort of downtrodden.
You're just wounded in your heart.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me I'm pretty.
Yeah.
Tell me I'm pretty. All right, let's cut to
You
the
are pretty,
news. Let's cut to
Chauncey.
the misery that other people have to suffer through. That'll make me feel
Your
better.
beard
A
is
little
luscious and powerful.
schadenfreudery, right? What do we got?
Yeah, well, so Trump buried his wife in a golf course.
Yeah, okay. There's not much else to that story, but there's plenty to be said there. I'm curious what people. Sorry if there is. I didn't cut you off. Is there
No,
more to
that
this?
was the end. That was the end of the sentence.
Yeah. Okay. Um, I wonder how his followers like. Do they think that like that's a because when I first heard it, I heard everybody making fun of it, like on the left, right? And I
Yeah.
thought, and I thought to myself, well, I mean, that might be a thing. Maybe there's a big park there, and maybe there's other sort of family members there and stuff like that. But man, when I saw the picture of it, it looked like they just chopped a swatch out of the green and shoved in a coffin.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm not super riled about this one. The article is interesting. It talks about sort of why there. And it goes into, well, maybe it's tax evasion, but that doesn't make as much sense because he already basically doesn't pay taxes on this property just because of like other reasons. And, maybe it's like a really beautiful spot, but it's like, okay, it isn't really. And maybe it's just, I incline to their third explanation, which is that these are kind of weird people. And,
Yeah, yeah,
like it's like putting ketchup on steak, it's like it's not what I do, but honestly, I mean I can't really judge. He's a guy burying his ex-wife. It's weird to me that it was like up to him,
that
which
is weird.
maybe it
Yeah,
wasn't, which like I'm not totally clear on the details, but it seems like Ivana Trump was not married to Donald Trump, and she was rich in her own right, and surely she had a will that specified the stuff. But maybe she didn't. Maybe there was an oversight, and he ended up being like, "Hey, you got to decide." Because it's not in here, but that seems very strange to me. So what I suspect is that she did in fact have a will and she wanted to be buried there, and the news is kind of just making something out of nothing.
right, right. Yeah, that's very similar view that I had. I thought it was kind of a Duck Dynasty move more than anything. It was just kind of like, okay, these are weird somewhere between nouveau riche and the Habsburgs,
Mm,
basically a little too incestuous for their own good, not physically, but and then so I thought that was weird, but then ultimately I thought, well, it was probably up to the kids, and the way their dynasty
oh
works
yeah, maybe.
is that Trump makes all those decisions, or they come to Trump and say, what are our options, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, I agree with you that while it's weird, weird I can handle. I like weird.
Yeah.
If there was more weird out there, I'd be more okay with that. So like, let's put somebody else in here that I like. Who do I actually like? Do I like anybody? Let's say Tom Hanks buried his wife at his personal golf course. I would find that somewhat oddly endearing.
Yeah. See, there was roll back to the Trump presidency. There was that 4 years where it seems like every show, every piece of news was always making fun of Trump for the dumbest stuff. They were always, getting at Trump in like, making oblique references to, oh, this fictional dictator in our show who's totally not Trump has super small hands.
Right.
Always stuff like that. And every time it was so cringy and just so bad because it's like, and we did exactly, liberals have not learned. We did exactly the same thing with George Bush. We criticized him for nuclear or however he said it,
Right.
saying it wrong, and his sort of cowboy hat persona. It's like, my dudes, my guys, he's a war criminal. He murdered 200,000 Iraqis. Like,
right,
you can criticize him for that. You can criticize him for the actual thing. You don't, and I don't know. There's just a version. It's media people, they love this like schoolyard gossip. They think it's like, I don't know what they think. They think, ooh, the rubes will be really interested in that. Yeah. I think that's what it is ultimately, is that there's no political agenda. They're not actually trying to bring this guy down.
Right.
They're just doing what sells, which is frankly even worse to me. Like, have some principles.
Yeah, no, I agree.
If you want to criticize him, criticize him.
Right. It's like, I hear it all the time on CNN talking about Fox and Fox talking about CNN. They're just all, oh, well, they're not really reporting the news. Neither of you guys are. I mean, it's like literally 20 hours of editorial, and it's not news, it's editorial. When you see Tucker Carlson on the screen, okay, for anybody listening, if you see Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Rachel Maddow, you see Jake Tapper, you see any of these people on the screen where they're the star of the show, it's not news. It's an editorial. They're talking about the news, then they're bringing in people to talk about their opinions, and they're talking about their opinions. Right. It's not news. So none of it's fake. It's just not news.
Yeah.
What do you call fake news that's not actually news?
Yeah, and I think there's a space for editorials, right? Like,
absolutely.
There's a space to, bring in experts, talk about, analyze, sort of work through it. But it's also, it's also just very craven. And I don't know. I have a very low opinion of TV news in general. So, like... But that's what people watch the most. It's because it's 24. The other thing is 24-hour news. It's like enough things don't happen in a day that I need to know about to justify 24-hour news. But that's what people want, and that's what works. And that's ultimately, if you do want to spread an opinion, if you do want to spread a topic, then 24-hour news is the way to do it, because that form of media is a fire hose and everything else is a squirt gun.
Right. Yeah. So I'm sick of Trump. So let's talk about something else. What's our next story?
Yeah. Well, if you're sick of Trump, then you'll love the dude who turned in his
the next
Capitol
one's about
rioter.
Trump also, isn't it?
Only indirectly. So basically, you sent me an interview on CNN with a dude who turned in his father, who was a rioter at on January 6th at the Capitol, who got a lot of years in prison, basically. And
9 years, the most amount of years so far.
Yeah. And basically this kid talking about, well, not kid, he's like adult son.
Still pretty. I have kids. I barely consider you an adult, so I don't know. I guess it's all relative.
That's valid. In any case, he turned in his dad, and he was sort of talking about that, and sort of talking about the thoughts that come up, which seem to be basically his dad makes his own decisions, and it sucks that he's in prison now, but that's what happens, you know.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of nuances here to sort of think about, and that's why I found this so incredibly interesting.
Mm-hmm.
A kid turning in his dad. There's one. Okay, so this dad took a gun into the Capitol building.
Right.
So this is why he's been charged with so much. He's not charged with so much. He took a gun in and made threatening remarks towards Nancy Pelosi. Which, regardless out there how you feel about Nancy Pelosi, she is an elected official in the United States government. I don't think making serious threats towards one of these people is okay. I don't pretend to know if it's illegal or not. I know nothing about the law, but I do know taking a gun into the Capitol building is bad unless you're a congressman, apparently. But yeah, I don't know. So would you turn in your dad is the question.
I mean, if they were at the Capitol riots, yeah, absolutely. Honestly, if my dad like went to the Charlottesville riots, which are not illegal, just like, the Charlottesville rally with the tiki torches and the Jews will not replace us and the whole.
Right.
Like, if my dad was at that, I would tell his employers and everyone he knows, hey, because people like that don't deserve to be out and about, regardless of who they are.
Even your dad. So water is not.
Well, I can say that comfortably because that's the opposite
water.
of the way my dad is in the real life.
Gotcha,
But
right,
I'm sure my feelings would be more complicated if I thought it would come up. But look, ethically speaking, because that's all I can speak to. I can't talk about how I behave in a situation, I've never been in. But like ethically speaking, I think the right thing to do is to, if there's someone who has these horrible beliefs in a position of power, you gotta get them out of power. You gotta remove them. And in fact, a friend of mine from high school, I lost contact with for many, many years. He pops back up on Facebook. He friends me. I notice he's posting Holocaust denial. So
weird one to revisit.
Yeah, in the intervening years, he had apparently become a full neo-Nazi. So I did just shoot a message to his boss being like, hey, just so you know, this guy's a neo-Nazi.
Did you really?
I have no idea if anything came of it. No one responded, but I don't think guys like that should have jobs.
Get a raise.
So, yeah, maybe he did, honestly. He worked at some trucking company, so who knows?
That is wild. As far as sending my dad to prison or turning him in, this is a nest of weird feelings here, because the one reason why I find Trump sort of endearing on any level is he kind of reminds me of my dad.
Ooh, okay. There's a lot to unpack there.
Right. So there's like a lot to unpack, I
think he reminds a lot of voters of their dad.
Yeah.
They just haven't done the emotional work. They haven't unpacked things the way you have. They're like, God, Dad knows best.
Because like
I've got to vote for him or he'll get the switch.
So I'm not sure, but I'd like to think. Don't know. I don't know. That's a hard one to answer. Because as you're saying, I think a lot of that would stem from the relationship that I had with my dad.
Sure.
Like if I had like this great relationship with my dad, which I'm pretty sure I had a better relationship than I would have with Trump. But if I had this great relationship with my dad and he went and did that, I would basically probably more aptly use it as a sort of conversation sort of way to like get in there and be all like, I can't be having this in my life, and I'm going to have to leave out of your life if you don't put it into this and stuff like that. But I mean, if my dad was a sort of personality that was just always like, book up, shut up, stoic, like the sort of personality that I kind of imagine this person to have been, yeah, I'd turn him in.
Yeah. And I mean, who knows? It might have been that he wasn't particularly stoic. It might have been that he was a, a mess of a person,
That's true. That is
crying
true.
all the time. But like, you can make certain inferences though about, the levels of toxic masculinity that may or may not have been present in the type of guy who goes and riots at the Capitol.
Right.
So uh I don't know. I think it is very important to catch these guys and punish them essentially, because that appears to be the only sort of thing that really dissuades that kind of behavior. Is the threat of actual consequences. And it's so funny because it's like black people know that if they go to the Capitol and riot with assault rifles, they'll go to prison or get killed there.
Mm-hmm.
Black people know that. Queer people know that. I think if there was a trans uprising at the Capitol, it probably wouldn't go super well. It's really just like
sounds like a right-wing horror movie, though. Trans uprising at the Capitol.
God, I wish. But it's like white suburbanites, I think, need to maybe be reminded that the law applies to them sometimes.
Yeah.
On occasion, every 400,000 years, when the stars align, they can be held accountable for their actions. And, that's what's happening here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think breaking into the Capitol is an absolute no-no, and I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're on my side, their side. Now, part of the problem here is that we either have self-fulfilling prophecy or we're in a really weird situation here. So here, everybody's been all conspiracy for years, right? Mm-hmm. And then now we're sitting on a massive one. We're sitting on, if you're on the left, a attempted coup of the United States government, easily the most militarily powered country in the world.
I mean, what we're talking about is a fascist takeover of the U.S.
So. Right. And on the other side, you're looking at a deep state overthrowing of democracy.
The children are turning in their parents. No one is safe. It's the secret police, right?
Right. So it's like everybody, it seems, believes one or the other.
I think this is what happens when you're in a population that would end up in a civil war if the people were younger. So we're kind of in a cold civil war, and I think we have been for a while.
Yeah. But do you think it's coming to a head?
It's hard to say. I think if it's coming to a head, I think we're a few decades out still. Mm-hmm. But what one can imagine scenarios in which some form of civil war occurs. It would all have to do basically with secession. I think it's not hard to imagine something that I think would get like Texas and maybe a couple other states to secede. I don't know, let's say some loon killed all of Trump's Supreme Court justices. Like, that's extremely unlikely, but let's say that happened and then like Biden filled all those seats with Democrats, right? I think if that happened, half of the red states would probably just leave the union. And then once that happens, you've got the same issue you ran into in the American Civil War, which is what do you do with military bases? Because the American Civil War, there were several months when the North and the South were peaceful after the secession. The only trouble was the North was like, we don't recognize you as a country, and also we are keeping our personnel and we're keeping everything at our military bases the same. So until this, gets back to normal. And the South was like, actually, we don't want this hostile country having like military bases dotted all over our countryside with their personnel and their everything. And so they tried to take over a fort, and that's what sparked the Civil War. And I think that's exactly what would happen if secession happened in the United States and it wasn't very intelligently done, because there have been peaceful secessions in history, but it's it's much more common for it to end in war. So I think that's how it could happen. Just if one side manages to piss off the other side enough that they feel that they have to leave the union. And honestly, I feel like we've kind of been trying to like, because we know whoever ends up with the federal government is in a much stronger position. So we've just kind of, both sides have been trying to shove the other side out of the union by just doing increasingly outrageous things. I don't know if that's ever been a conscious strategy, but I think that's kind of what the effect's been,
Right.
And like there was some talk about that over here on the West Coast after the Roe decision. Basically, okay, well, why do we have to be part of the government? It didn't come to anything, but that's the type of thing that I can imagine.
Yeah.
That might lead
again,
to a
the government's not letting the West Coast economy go, because
exactly.
as much as these middle states like to think that they're paying taxes for states like California, it is very much the other way around. Very much the other way around. That shouldn't be the case. I think that should be the case.
Yeah.
California has a higher GDP, it has a higher population, it's putting more money into the system, that money gets spread around. That's what a country is. So, I'm totally on board with that.
That's how it works. Yeah.
Right. But
the same is true of Texas. If Texas seceded, that would be
in Florida.
Pretty bad. Or Texas, Florida, New York, Michigan, all these states with big populations.
Right. They're helping states like Kansas, which should probably get more help. So while we're at it.
Yeah.
What about the 9 years? So this guy's kid turns him in, and this guy gets 9 years for taking a pistol into the Capitol building. The daughter said something very interesting, and she said that whatever my dad gets, and she's on the side of her dad.
Mm-hmm.
Both the daughters and the mom are in opposition to the son who turned in the dad.
Right.
But one of the daughters said, whatever my dad gets, I think Trump should get 1 year more.
I mean, yeah, at least, right? Because I don't know, this is how our system looks at it, right? If you are manipulated by years and years of, propaganda on talk radio, on these news networks that were explicitly founded as propaganda networks, Sinclair, Fox, others. If you swallow all those lies and act accordingly, you go to prison. But the guy selling the lies, it's like, let the buyer beware. You were buying what I'm selling. And it's like, okay, but that's there needs to be some accountability for the propagandists, and because they're ultimately the force behind all of this.
Right. And should this guy get anything is also the question, because part of this, we think like, oh, if I tell you to go shoot some people and you go do it, we both are responsible. But that's because I ain't your boss. So imagine that you carry a gun legally.
Sure.
You're in a store and a fight breaks out with guns involved, and a cop is defending people, and he asks you if you have a gun and asks you to help him.
Right.
If that ends up being the wrong call, and maybe that cop is the bad guy, but you helped him, are you at fault?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how juries would sort of take that, but I think in that situation, I would hope that a lot of blame would kind of end up on the police officer, but also, ordinary people need to be responsible with their weapons and stuff. But also, I don't know that that's really.
But a sense of urgency had been built up so much to the point where, maybe people didn't feel that they were in the position to say, hold on a second, let's take a look. Like, so if I'm in a grocery store and there's a shootout happening and this cop is just all, I need your help. I'm just all, well, what's your backstory, Mr. Officer? It's like there's a sense of urgency that's put on you by this person who is the urgency guy. So that's one area where I'm having a hard time. I'm just all like, are any of them really responsible? I don't know. That's a rough one. I don't pretend to
See,
answer it, but I don't.
see where I would deviate though is that I think that's a valid analogy for this situation. If you add a second cop who's saying, no, don't get involved,
Right, right.
red cop, blue cop, right? One cop saying, get your gun, we need to kill this bank robber, and the other guy's like, it's literally just a black dude.
Right. Plus, I haven't been researching this cop in this grocery store for 4 years up until now.
Right. So yeah, I don't think there's a lot of like real good analogs in our daily life that are easy to understand to that allow us to grapple in an intelligent way with the scale of just like propaganda and money and the power of media and the power of demagogue politicians. I think this guy should get time. Like ultimately, you can't blame everything on the propaganda, but I think I think the OAN and Newsmax and all these people who were saying that this had to happen and Trump should also definitely get some time because it wouldn't have happened without them. But that's sort of not the way our legal system and system of morality is set up. You can our system is based on the idea that it's sort of impossible to override another person's will, and it's sort of impossible to do so. And it's like, it really isn't. You just need lots of time and lots of money.
Right.
So,
yeah. Well, I don't know. Be interesting to find out how many families were affected by this, and how many.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what history has to say about this, given that there is history to have. So I don't know. What do you got next?
Yeah, we're talking about Stephen King. We're talking about Stephen King, basically who went before the government as part of an antitrust thing and testified on behalf of the government, saying that the big five publishers should be broken up. The big five being Penguin, Random House, Simon and Schuster, HarperCollins, Hachette Book Group, and Macmillan, which are, those five basically control most of book publishing. So it was another antitrust thing. It was interesting to see. It's interesting to talk about this, and it's like, on one hand, it's horrifying that the entire field is controlled by like five companies. But on the other hand, if you know anything about any industry, then I'm kind of like, wow, there are five companies.
Right. Yeah.
Like
especially a dying one.
Because like most food is like two or three companies. You look at Amazon, it's essentially a monopoly. Like,
well, it is, but that's because antitrust doesn't apply to them.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, do the antitrust stuff. I'm always in favor of breaking up the power of these big corporations, but it's like, my guys, Simon and Schuster is not the problem. They're not the biggest offenders.
No, I agree. And plus, it's a dying industry, so I was surprised that it was five. I was expecting it to be two or three for it to hit this point. But I totally agree with him. And it really raised the question for me as to where do we draw the line? So a monopoly, I mean, we understand what a monopoly is, but where do we draw a line on the size and power of these businesses? These multi-corporate conglomerates and stuff like that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that slowly over time, things become comfortable. They do one step further, and things become comfortable. One step further, and things become comfortable. Imagine if you went back to the founding fathers and explained to them Amazon or General Electric or any of these things. Wouldn't they? I would assume they would be horrified.
Yeah.
at the power that those companies have. Yeah, I don't know. I think antitrust in general is a joke because it doesn't apply to online businesses. Antitrust is purely a brick and mortar situation, from my understanding of it, and that's why Amazon has
today
crushed many businesses, including brick and mortar businesses, because they were able to do business tactics that you wouldn't be allowed to do if you had a brick and mortar location.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know. I don't think it's the hottest of takes necessarily to say that, you know, corporations have so much wealth and power that it is essentially trivial for them to defeat any legislative challenge for that power.
Mm.
But it's worth repeating sometimes, you know. Everyone knows it, but it's worth repeating sometimes that if, you know, if someone wanted to say, okay, well, maybe antitrust should apply to Amazon, that person would then be facing an enormous uphill battle.
Oh,
You
right.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like I seriously doubt that's really ever going to happen.
Yeah. Coincidentally, that incumbent got voted out.
Exactly. You know, unless there's just enormous grassroots pressure and just an enormous amount of funding from like ordinary people to do this, or, you know, maybe in the context of like massive worker strikes or something. But like there's no business as usual scenario where antitrust could be made to apply to Amazon. They have too much power over our political process to make that happen. You know, the reason we're seeing this happen with these book people is because they aren't Amazon. They aren't as powerful.
So. Yeah, and that's funny because that used to be their competitor, but
right.
now Amazon doesn't care about books because books doesn't make any money. But originally, Amazon, for those out there, I'm sure you know, Kara, but for those out there, Amazon started as a book selling store. That's what it was. You know,
yeah.
I used to list and sell books on Amazon for Bog Bean Books and Music and Renting. That was a job of mine for years. And yeah, I think that a dying industry is bound to eventually, there'll only be one left. So that's the interesting thing about monopolies. Let's say I sell purple snarf flats. Nobody cares. Nobody buys them. I sell 5 a month, but I'm the only game in town. Am I a monopoly?
Yeah. Well, I think the publishing industry is never going to die. It's just going to get really small. But I don't think that necessarily means there's only going to be one seller. There might be competition for a pretty small pie, but there could still be competition. It's just the overall share is decreasing. And also, books are still pretty big business. Like that will take a while.
Yeah.
Like physical books, certainly, you know, ebooks are really disrupting it, but like people still read.
Yeah.
Lots of books get published every year and lots of books get bought every year. So
yeah, even my aunt who's in her 70s, she reads on her Kindle. I don't think she reads many physical copies any longer.
Everything I read pretty much is on my Kindle app on my laptop, but I read a lot. You know, I buy a lot of books that people have written, so I am funding the publishing industry. I'm just not buying. Also, I don't like the texture of paper. It's a weird thing. I've never liked it. It freaks me out. So
I love it. Everybody else.
Yeah, I know. I feel
but you don't care.
Yeah, and also I majored in literature, so for 4 years I was around all these book nerds who's like, oh, I love the smell of a book, and I was like, I like the smell, but I don't want to touch it. It's scratchy on my skin.
On my fragile skin.
On my fragile skin. Yeah, that's right. Let's talk about missiles.
All right.
So yeah, the latest Al Qaeda leader who was killed, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Ugh, God, I should know how to say that. But anyway, he's dead now, so who cares? Right. But was basically killed with one of these ultra precision missiles, which with nicknames like the Flying Ginsu or the Ninja Bomb. It's the R9X Hellfire missile. And basically the idea of it is it's supposed to be something where like you can kill someone in a specific room, right? Or you can kill someone in a specific car or something without hurting the people around them. So it's supposed to be a more surgical method for this kind of thing.
So I would assume this is some kind of like drone missile. Somebody's piloting it. You don't have to have an answer.
Yeah,
but
I don't know. But I would guess it's more like
to do that, you know.
I think a missile travels much too fast for someone to like steer it. You know,
Yeah,
there's
that's
no one
true.
with a
It is rocket
joystick. It's
powered.
it's probably like you select a location and then it does sort of the telemetry and the pathfinding to get there.
Right. I heard Bill Maher say the funniest thing about this, and he said that if that guy was wearing a burqa, they wouldn't have known it was him. They wouldn't have killed him.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty damn funny. Well, had you just been wearing a burqa too, they wouldn't have known it was you on your porch every morning.
Yeah, and I mean it raises these things. Missiles can get, super precise all you want, but it also depends on intelligence capabilities, right? People have been talking since the Iraq War, since before the Iraq War, about how good these smart bombs were and about how smart bombs were going to make it so that, we wouldn't have collateral damage anymore. It's like, well, how well did that work out? It really didn't. There was absurd amounts of collateral damage in Iraq and Afghanistan. The people in those regions are going to despise us forever. Their children will despise us because of all the collateral damage we did, because it sort of cancels out. If you think you have this incredibly precise, sensitive instrument, then you're going to use it more. And occasionally you're going to be wrong, because that's the nature of warfare. So
right. How long until we dice up a busload of orphans? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, and I mean, even assuming the capabilities of this weapon are what they say they are, which I'm skeptical, just because there is this history of people saying, yeah, these smart bombs could kill a mosquito and leave the person, intact. And it's like, that was never true.
Yeah.
People were saying that during the Iraq War, and they were just bombs. And, there were times when the hospitals and stuff got targeted. Like, people died horribly. So, but even assuming the capabilities are what they say they are, what's to stop intelligence being like, that person in the burqa, that's definitely the Al Qaeda person. They don't fool us, and firing the bomb, and surprise, surprise, it's not.
User error.
Yeah, it comes down to user error, and I just ultimately have very little faith in our intelligence organizations. I think they mostly get it right, but it only takes like one instance of accidentally blowing up the busload of orphans to, you have to get it right every time, and they don't.
Uh-huh.
They can't. No
Yeah,
one
but
can.
this goes both ways. So, you have some sort of militant revolutionary ideas about what needs to go on to make this world better and change.
Sure.
And people get hurt in the crossfire. And a lot of those people who get hurt in the crossfire are the people who weren't standing up to. So in our case, we're not standing up to our own government, who's going to do things that maybe you disagree with. And people here will get hurt, possibly in the crossfire as that happens. I don't think I'm explaining that very well, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, the difference is that I don't believe in murder, even for the revolution, right? I'm fine with forms of violence that are like property destruction. I'm fine with, I don't care really if you throw a brick at a cop, right? But I do care if you're shooting people with a sniper rifle. Like,
What if it kills the cop when you throw the brick at him?
Well, I mean,
You care
yeah,
that one. I get you. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, yeah,
trying to split
it's
hairs.
exactly that. But but that's also in a different category too, from premeditated murder, which I don't think is good for the cause or necessary. I think, honestly, I think premeditated murder is a very bad tool for revolution. Historically, it's the threat of violence has been a very useful tool historically, not just for revolution, but in acting political change within systems. But it doesn't have to be the threat of death. It can just be the threat of other things that are technically violent, like riots, a lot of the civil rights provisions, a lot of the gay rights provisions were passed under sort of the cloud of, hey, and if this doesn't pass, there's going to be civil unrest. That's the kind of thing I'm down with. I'm fine with civil unrest. And honestly, I'm fine with people getting caught in the crossfire. It's sad when that happens, but I'm to a certain extent fine with that, because those people aren't dying, right?
Gotcha.
But I consider myself a socialist, and I'm militant in some way, but I'm not say I never thought, yeah, there should be, Bolshevik uprising in the United States and, grab your people's AK and start shooting cops. I don't think that would end well for anyone. If I thought that would work, maybe, but it wouldn't.
Right.
It's a bad idea.
So it's something like this is a bloodless coup, but we're still going to break all your stuff.
Yeah, I don't care if I don't care if you break bones to make a better world. Just don't kill anyone.
Right. No,
or at least not on purpose.
And I get what you're saying. It's a hard thing to state, and I agree with that. I think premeditatedly murdering people is bad. I don't know about this case for me, because I mean, if you kill a killer before they kill, like if somebody's going to kill you and I kill them first, I think I could. Might take me a couple of weeks, but I could sleep after that.
Sure. Yeah.
So, this is maybe a larger scale version of that, but at the same time, it's hard to trust. It's hard to trust if it is. Now, don't get me wrong. In this case, am I fairly confident that this guy deserved it? Yes, I am. We'll never get his DNA. We'll never know if it's him for sure. I mean, until we have another missile that can go in and get the DNA and bring it back, where's that missile? But, so we don't actually, we really can't be 100% sure that we killed this guy, but I think we're pretty sure.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna shed any tears for like Islamic militants, because I don't agree with them. I wouldn't shed, wouldn't shed tears for a white supremacist who got killed either. But totally. Also, I mean, I definitely
hell as David Koresh.
Exactly. I even when it's guys like this who I don't like, I'm still not particularly comfortable with the government having the power to just extrajudicially kill people in totally different countries, where we have no authority. We're the world's police, and I think there should be an actual world police. There should be, because if we're the world's police, then we're, a Baltimore cop from the 70s. We're the most corrupt police there is, and there should. And, maybe someone should be dealing with it, terrorism abroad and stuff. But I would rather do nothing than I think have an actual unbiased multilateral coalition of people that has some claim to represent everyone. If you're going to be doing stuff like this, that's the only body I think that really would have the standing to do that,
I agree with that, and I think that that's kind of being attempted or been attempted, but of course, it gets ripped in, ripped out, but I think that was somewhat going on at one point. But I do get that. But the problem with who watches the watchers is that every new watcher needs a watcher.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's what NATO's supposed to be and stuff. But the thing is, NATO only represents the West, right? And this is my problem with the whole world police idea, is because the people who end up getting policed, quote unquote, they have no say.
Right.
And you might say, well, how do we give them a say? They don't have, we're talking about failed states. We're talking about countries that are, maybe have a tenuous grip on democracy. So even if we do give them a say, it won't really be the people. It'll just be whatever their oligarchs are,
right,
or their dictators. So it's tough, but I would rather not kill guys like this than do it in a way that is unjust, and that's what I think we're doing.
Yeah, what we need is a missile that flies right up to their face and says, "We could have ninja swiped you with our ninja missile. We're just showing you. You better knock that off next time. This is going to be a ninja missile." I don't think that'll work.
It's a food for thought, Chauncey. Maybe a missile version, but it's just like a Nerf dart, explodes into Nerf darts.
Totally. It's a pie, or it has like a big boxing glove on the tip. So it just like
yeah, I mean, this is the future liberals want.
It is
boxing glove.
Yeah,
smart missile. Yeah,
burns a snowflake into their forehead.
You fire that, but it ends up killing a busload of orphans anyway. Somehow,
Totally.
It ignites the gas tank. 30 people die.
Look at all these orphans with snowflakes burned onto their foreheads.
Oh God! Oh God!
All right.
Uh,
What do we got next in the world of unrest?
um, we have pets.
Yeah, what?
We have pets.
Pets?
Yeah, so people in Japan are putting fans, wearable fans on their dogs and cats in order to deal with the unbearable heat wave that's going on in Japan right now.
Yeah, yeah. I thought this was cute. I wonder how effective it is, though. It didn't look very effective, I gotta tell you.
Yeah. It
It
seems like
looked
you
like
would need
more of an excuse to strap some tech to your pet.
yeah, it seems like you need some kind of like cooling, like an actual AC. If you just have a fan, I don't know how much that's gonna help. Like,
Yeah. There's a lot to be said here for the environment, but I think the real message here is that people are stupid as all hell. So,
yeah,
my dog is hot. He was born in a sweater. I'm going to put another sweater on him with a fan on it
yeah,
so that this square stays cool, but the rest of him is wearing a sweater, like in his little dog armpits and stuff. It's like, I don't know. It's pretty stupid. People, God, we're stupid. We're a ridiculous people. We're a ridiculous species.
yeah. And I think Japan and Korea sort of love the tech solutions for sort of tech's sake more
Yeah.
than maybe even we do. uh, so it had to happen in Japan. It was gonna happen anywhere, but
I did have
I don't
something
know.
very nerdy come to mind. Last night I was finishing up the new Green Lantern cartoon.
As you do.
And so Green Lantern and Green Arrow, they're on a ship. You don't need to know the backstory. They're on a ship and one of the guys says, "Do you think you can fly this thing?" And Green Arrow says, "Yeah, my buddy told me that the true test of any society's technology and how advanced it is ultimately just how intuitive it is."
Hmm.
And I thought, that's really, really true because here we are, we look at so a lot of people in my age bracket, I know knowing only me and Andrea in my age bracket, you think that we're all tech geniuses,
Sure.
but most of people in my age bracket are computer phobic, and maybe they do a little bit on their phone. I was trying to teach my
But you
mother-in-law.
guys were in high school when the internet, was starting out.
Yeah,
You were not even that old, really, when it first
yeah.
got going.
And
But
my
I guess
mom,
the internet back there was pretty lame,
yeah,
in the early 90s.
yeah, it was mostly porn and Napster. But
Yeah.
oh well, I guess nothing's changed. My
Born in
mom was a
Napster, that's
was a
for sure.
writer, and so I grew up with a computer. So I
Hmm.
kind of had the luck of feeling comfortable with the computer. But I was trying to teach my mother-in-law how to use her phone, and she said, "Well, how do I find my friends on here?" And I'll look around at the little pictures. What pictures do you see? Does anything look like it might help you find something? And she's all, "There's a magnifying glass." And I'm all, "Go ahead and hit that." And she like, I'm just all like, it's
Right.
made intuitively now, to the point where
Yeah.
nobody should have these fears of technology. But I'm getting off the topic. Um, I appreciate what you're doing to your little dogs. You should probably work on that because they're cooking, man. You just put a sweater on something that was born in a sweater. Give it a break. Shave it. Shave the thing, you know?
Yeah. Well, speaking of Japan, okay, something kind of funny and dark has happened. Shinzo Abe got assassinated. That was
Yeah.
a whole thing.
Mhm.
And we talked about it on the show. So the assassin was basically a kook who murdered this guy because he perceived there being some ties between Shinzo Abe and the Moonies, basically the Unification Church. Who this guy's mother had basically ruined her life and kind of his life by giving away all the family money to this church.
Right.
Um, and so he had a grudge about that, and so thought, I'm going to assassinate this politician who is close to this organization to bring sort of attention to the fact of this. the weird part, and I've never seen this happen with an assassination before, is a lot of Japanese people are like reporting has come out since then that shows he was actually basically right. And that Shinzo Abe did have these huge ties to the Moonies, and also so do a bunch of other politicians, and it's actually really unethical. To the point that a lot of Japanese people are now planning to protest the state funeral for Shinzo Abe, and they're saying, you know, they shouldn't have this state funeral. And I've never seen that before, where someone looked at an assassinate and was like, he actually has a point. Usually because they don't have a point. Usually because they're just so crazy. You know, the shooters and stuff, like, you know, they believe in the great replacement or something. It's like there's nothing even to deal with there. It's just they're so insane. You know, their brains are full of spiders. You can't hand it to them.
Right. This is like if Ronan Farrow shot. Who's the Hollywood molester?
Well, that doesn't narrow
Weinstein.
It down. Woody Allen or Weinstein.
Although Ronan Farrow does have loose connections to Woody Allen as well. But yeah, so this guy was the kook who killed the guy because of his kooky beliefs. But once they did it, they looked into it and said he wasn't the kook. He was the only guy who knew.
Yeah, his kooky beliefs were right. And he wasn't the only guy who knew, but like no one really cared until he shot this guy. So like his plan worked. Like it did exactly what he was trying to do, which was bring attention to this issue, which now has a huge amount of attention on it. And I've never seen that in my life. I was just saying, I don't think murder is a good tool for political change. And this, I think, is kind of the exception that proves the rule, because I've never seen this kind of thing happen before. But it's just bizarre.
I blame anime. The way people, this sort of thing happens in anime.
I suppose, yeah.
You know, I blame Asian cinema on the whole, or at least East Asian cinema, because you got like Old Boy and all that stuff coming out of Korea, and a lot of that sort of mind humpery coming out of Japanese horror films. There's a lot of these sort of like weird twists and like long play vengeances and like so self-fulfilling prophecy. But yeah, good for that guy. I don't know, you know, this
I mean, he's gonna spend life in prison, but yeah,
right.
So like,
once again, I'd prefer them, you know, maybe figure it out another way. But
yeah, you know what it reminds me of is it reminds me of the Riddler from the newest Batman movie, just in part because of the sort of like aesthetic of his, like this guy had that sort of taped together shotgun, and you know, the Riddler had sort of the tape mask, and I think that's sort of what reminds me of it. But until the end of that movie, at least, when the Riddler goes off the deep end, spoilers for those who haven't seen it, and decides to like flood the entire city. Until the end of the movie, he's just like killing a bunch of people who objectively had it coming. So
yeah.
It's like, well, he's crazy, but honest, like if the movie had stopped right before the Riddler floods Gotham, he would have been a much more complicated character. Because it would have been like, well, Batman wasn't stopping this stuff, the Riddler did.
Yeah, well, you know, the best villains think they're heroes.
Yeah, and I don't know. There's a clumsy thing Hollywood does a lot, where I think they take that idea, and it's like the best villains think they're heroes, and so they have like for 3/4 of the thing, the villains essentially just be the heroes, but you know, maybe they kill people, and then at the very end they have to be like, oh, but we have to make sure the audience doesn't root for them. You know, we have to give the hero. That's something that happened in Black Panther. And it's something that happened in a lot of Marvel movies, frankly. Also in, it really annoyed me actually in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV show. They did that. And it's like, it sounds to me like the Flag Smashers were right. You know, they were right up until the last episode when What's-Her-Bucket just like killed a bunch of people. Yeah, thank you.
I just happen to know that, sorry.
Right, you know, she jumps off the deep end and kills a bunch of people just so that she can't be right. You know, it's like, if she was,
they should have them maybe escalate a little.
I think if you think, you know, that kind of radicalism is bad, which is a reasonable position to take, then you can just say that. You can just say it's bad for her to kill people, even if she's right. But you don't have to do the thing where it's like it's bad for her to kill people. And also at the very end, she tossed a baby in a wood chipper. Like, so she's wrong now because we had her do that.
Right.
Even though it was out of character. And it's especially egregious in superhero things because like the whole idea of superheroes is they solve problems through violence. If you're running up to someone and punching them with their super fist, if you're the hero, they get knocked out, and if you're the villain, they turn into a bloody pulp, right?
Right.
But in real life, if you use violence against a human being, you're risking that something will happen.
Well, that's a big complaint with Star Trek over the years, is that initially Star Trek was mostly about solving problems without violence.
Right.
Doctor Who as well. Both of those shows were really about solving problems without violence, and then in the end, there's more shootouts, and especially in Star Trek. Doctor Who is still kind of held on a little bit better to the non-shootout resolution, but Star Trek has very much gone into the wars and the backstories and stuff. But the original series and the Next Generation, there were very few shootout outcomes to plot lines.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's especially annoying when it's like the whole genre is the we resolve things with shootouts show, but the villain is bad because people died in the shootouts. Right. It's like, have you seen Daredevil? Like every episode, Daredevil is pinning someone against a wall and punching them 60 times in the head. That person is dead.
Right.
That person is dead now. You killed them with your fist. You punched them until their head was like an overripe
Punisher is a
pumpkin.
Prime example.
And the Punisher actually just does kill people. He's, I think, supposed to be morally ambiguous, but like,
but he's also a hero. He's got two Santas.
It's not really that ambiguous in the show. He only kills bad people. It would be ambiguous if he got it wrong sometimes, like a real person would, but he doesn't. So,
or stray bullets or anything like that. All right. What's our final story to
Our final story is billionaires are funding a massive treasure hunt in Greenland as ice sheets melt. This isn't actually as egregious as I thought it was upon reading the headline. Because what they're funding is a group of billionaires, including Bezos, Bloomberg, and Bill Gates, are trying to fund a search for basically nickel, cobalt, and other metals that are needed to create electric cars, that are needed to create just a lot of sort of green energy things. And it's like, well, yeah, you should do that if, the ice sheets are melting. So if you can do something to help them melt less fast, then that's absolutely something we should be doing. I have seen a version of this exact story many years before, which was something more along the lines of Russian billionaires are searching for oil underneath melting ice sheets. Those kind of stories make me want to walk into the sea. But this is a benign version of that, I guess.
Well, I thought the interesting twist here was that the melting ice caps possibly could be providing us with some of the help that we need to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it's not really ultimately going to solve this problem, but I've had this thought. I would like to put this out there for the listening audience about green energy cars. People say, okay, so electric cars still get their power from coal a lot of the time because that's where the energy is coming from and it's going in the car. And people say, well, what's the point? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, the point is that it puts all of the situation into one area that can be worked on instead of every single person across the planet doing it. That's exactly. It's really that simple. I'm constantly hearing that argument and everybody's, well, why don't you do that? Well, that's why. Because it's a lot easier to fix one problem than 7 billion.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. That's not a good. there's no way to make the argument that like electric cars are not more green than gas burning cars. They just are.
Right.
And for one thing, they're not burning gas. You're using energy that would be used for other things anyway. But also, like, yeah, it's exactly what you said. You can modernize the power plants, which we need to do anyway. So we also need to do it with the cars. So it's
Yeah, and if it's
a silly
consolidated down to
argument.
the power plants, you take the most egregious, the worst offender, and you
Mhm.
modernize that one, and you work your way down. And
Right.
I don't know. It's all pretty simple. But so yes, I do think that it's interesting that melting ice caps might provide us some help in this situation. God has a plan, Kara. What are you gonna do?
See, I think that's the take people will be tempted to take from this. Like,
Oh, it is.
legitimately. Well, because people will be like, oh my gosh, the solution, the problem has the seeds of the solution in it. And it's like, not really, because you know what they could also be looking for? They could be looking for coal, but they aren't, because they recognize that climate change is a real problem and that coal is not the future. And the reason coal isn't the future anymore is because, we have green energy subsidies now and coal can't complete. Like, what I'm saying is, if there had never been any climate activism, if there had never been a climate movement, billionaires wouldn't be doing this. Maybe they would be looking for these minerals, but they wouldn't be looking for these minerals to do green stuff with. They would be looking, they would be looking for oil, and that's the way it was 10 years ago. So it's this is a heartening story, but it speaks to me of the effectiveness of the green movement and the effectiveness of climate legislation that's happened in the past, and just the extent to which people's opinions have changed to where they're taking this seriously. Whereas when I was a child, only Al Gore was taking it seriously. Most public figures weren't.
Well, I like to think that they're digging up some ancient god that they've been worshiping for
Oh
years.
God, I hope so.
But unfortunately, I think what they're going to end up doing is digging up some sort of new flesh-eating virus, because that's where this sort of thing comes from.
Maybe that's the ancient god.
But,
Maybe it's the
yeah, sure, why not?
yeah. Tie it into sort of the vaccine conspiracy theories, like COVID was actually an eldritch entity, satanic, unleashed from underneath the ice sheets by Bill Gates, so he could get us all the vaccine, which is going to turn us into communists.
This is not unlike season 2 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So, you know, maybe that's
Honestly,
what
that's
happened.
true. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been good times. It's been bad times. It's been times. Kara, good talking to you. Audience, bye.